it's my pleasure this evening to announce this semester's first speaker in the MFA Fine Arts Talk Series, Angela Dufresne, a painter who also makes drawings and prints and performative works that you can see on video, which are wonderful. Angela is also a community builder, a founding member of the Fragile Institute, a nomadic platform for exhibitions, publications, and social actions. And tell me again about the voting group. Is that for real? I couldn't find it online.
Advice, yeah.
Voting advice.
Yeah, advice.
Okay,
We collaborate with Walk the Walk.
got it. So the important takeaway there is that Angela is an artist who is civically engaged. You know, some bios have more flavor than others. This one is spicy. And so I'm going to quote her. She wields heterotropic narratives that are both non-hierarchical and unapologetically perverse, conjuring the rage, piss, and vinegar and passion of being female in America in 2022. I think that may also stand for 2023. I hope. Okay, great. Her work has been featured in a very long list of solo exhibitions at important museums and galleries. She's participated in residencies, pretty much all the big ones that I could think of, and has gotten a bunch of really major grants, including the Guggenheim Fellowship. She was educated at the Kansas City Art Institute. That's where she got her BFA, and got an MFA from Tyler School of Art at Temple University in Philadelphia. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Ms. Angela Dufresne.
Hello, people. Can I do my metal voice? I love microphones. They're so much fun. So actually it's good that Mark ended with my bio, because I'm gonna try to frame this talk with where I came from, how I was trained early on as an artist, because I feel like it's, I'm sure that people talk about that a lot, but in my case, I did go to two schools that were deeply steeped in American modernism. So well, my undergrad was basically a bunch of dudes going Picasso, Cezanne, Van Gogh, Basquiat, Picasso, Cezanne, de Kooning, Basquiat. So they threw in the great master Basquiat, who I'm sure you've all seen the show. Hopefully the Warhol Diaries, which actually that sequence in the Warhol Diaries is very exciting, the relationship they had. Zero women, just the kind of obvious artists of color were mentioned. And representation was thought of really dialectically. Now, everybody here has heard this term a lot. Mark asked me to unpack these things, so I will. The idea of the steeped idea that representation in art history is this thing that either the communists in Russia or the Nazis in Germany used to deploy, brainwash, and program large swaths of population to conform them to an ideology. One could say that maybe about North Korea or China at times, right? So abstraction became this thing that was born out of a need to intervene with totalitarianly constructed imaginatives, right? Or just oligarchical structures. So that there were two schools that I started in, which was a kind of a realist or an abstract modernist programmatic. And the realist was disallowed. And what I mean by realism is yeah, you could say 19th century French impressionism. You could also say art under Mao's wife, right? And the whole red training going on there. And they were you know, and maybe it was okay to go to Detroit and see Diego Rivera's frescoes, because they were considered modern and they were considered Marxists, and they were in a way, or socialists, and they were considered to be positive examples of representation. Whereas beauty, comedy, everyday mundane stuff of what makes up our daily life was sort of, unless it was in the conversation of modernism, disallowed. And certainly women's realities were disallowed as the possibility for subject. So for, I would say, the first 30 years of my life, and potentially the first 10, like 15 years of my painting life, realistically, I was grappling with this idea of like what the fuck representation meant, and how could I, who gains great pleasure in mimesis, right, in actually mimicking and copying things, gain a really strong foothold as an artist to do the social and political things and gain agency as an artist through representation. And the tools that I gleaned for that were not from my art education, which was ideological. It was white, hegemonic, European, ideological in its relationship to how modernism was supposed to function. And then I found Lily Tomlin. So what could a queer, just a weirdo, just a fucked up, non-normative person do with representation to dismantle its connection to power, to marketing, to intervene with the processes of its production of capital? So it's like, how can you all use your Instagram account to not basically sell your heart, soul, and body to Meta, right? Which is a challenge that we all need to deal with. And so at a certain point, and so in that way, like controlling our own representation, right? How can we use visually believable, recognizable images in a way that kind of counteract their perversion by people like now Elon Musk or certainly you know who at Facebook. And so even though this is mainstream television, I found it much more useful as a source for building my thinking than looking at paintings of Cézanne, which actually I like quite a lot now. I prefer de Kooning because he was actually astoundingly inventive and a total pervert, and I approve. By the way, there will be some cursing and a bit of nudity, some nudity which actually got me permanently kicked off of YouTube. So anyway, moving on. Here's a clip of Lily Tomlin doing this character that she developed for this show called Laugh-In, which was like 60s, 70s. It's where she evolved. I rediscovered Lily Tomlin recently as an icon, even though she's like a legendary queer icon, because of Sarah Jones. Anybody know Sarah Jones? She does impersonations of like amazing folks. She works in New York, and had this amazing one woman show where she impersonates, like she invocates all these fabulous women of color all throughout New York City, and basically makes a constellation of like this community that she needs to talk to. But there's also sometimes not just there are also like dudes named Hank from Memphis who are scary and white. But anyway, that aside, she's amazing, and she uses, and this is something I'm going to talk about, she uses mimetics. She uses, to a certain extent, doppelganging, copying, performing in personas as a mode of trying to build bridges for empathy and understanding between her and the other, whether it's Hank in Memphis or Chitra in Brooklyn. Okay, and so she actually is trying to perform and represent these bodies in non-extractive, non-fetishistic ways to be able to expand her individuality to something not so singular. So this is why my show is called This Is Not a One-Woman Show. All right, because I have this intense involvement with knowing and empathizing with my subjects through actually being able to manipulate and use my body as a medium, right? Painting is not a medium. I am the medium to transmit empathy and compassion and understanding and knowing of others through my work. So this is like a key principle that was disallowed me as a young artist, given modernism, in which you couldn't have meaning, you couldn't have representation, and you certainly, unless you were just thinking around the realms of aesthetics, you could not redeploy images of others, right? Because there's a disbelief in empathy and a disbelief in narrative in these ways that I was taught. Very structuralist modernist education. All right, so anyway, I'm gonna play this clip to make you happy.
One really dingy. A gracious hello. Have I reached the party to whom I am speaking? Is this General Motors? Hi, General. How's everything at the Pentagon? Tell me, how's Mrs. Motors? Oh, I beg your pardon. You are the president of the General Motors? Of Motown fame? Of course, now I recall General Motors. That's a switch, isn't it? Somebody recalling General Motors? Now then, sir, this is Ernestine Tomlin from Telephone Repair Service, or as we say in the trade, Ma Bell's Fix-It Shop. You've complained that your phone isn't working. Well, Mr. Motors. At long last, the brake shoe is on the other foot, so to speak. Now you know what it feels like to be stuck with a lemon. Let me see here, sir. Specifically, it's your hotline that's out of order. Is that correct? The one that goes directly from your office to the White House? What's that for, anyway? So you can call Milhouse before you make a decision? Oh, so he can call you before he makes a decision. Why, that's odd. I mean, Milhouse already knows more about shifting gears than anybody in the U.S. Oh, yes, I know. He believes whatever's good for General Motors is good for the country. But apparently he's never owned a Corvair.
Okay, so all of those characters are very important players. You could swap out the name Trump or whatever, soon to be Kevin McCarthy, and you would get a narrative of like the kinds of people she's using, this housewife working in a phone bank as a political savant, right? She's a political savant, like mockery, calling up these people in this astoundingly humorous address. I have this quote down here. I'm going to show the first exhibition I'm going to talk about, and the first body of work I'm going to talk about is based on films by Werner Schroeder. So this is where the name what Schroeder does with a face. What I wanted to talk about is the kind of, with this quote, is the kind of effectual magic that happens when text or to a certain extent persona swapping occur in the process of making a work. All right, so you take a text, you figure out how to translate it into something that's potent and that creates a trajectory that produces a kind of energy, and that's a process of play, transformation, and also the encapsulation of the textual in the visceral or the affect, your body being translated into this projection of a text. And Foucault says that this director, Werner Schroeder, does this kind of magic. Now, Schroeder, I'll talk about in a minute, with faces, with cheekbones, with the lips, and expression of the eyes, and a multiplying burgeoning of the body in exaltation. This kind of a state of a body highly potently charged is pretty much throughout all of my work, a kind of status that I'm like I'm like passionately like addicted to depicting, if that is even the right word for it. I would say it's more like finding, discovering through the act of translating something into paint or performance. Okay, so one of my other heroes is this human being, and I hit the link, which I shouldn't have done, although this one doesn't have it. Every frame that you would stop on is mind blowing, right? It's like every frame encapsulates like the cartooning and the grotesquerie of an Otto Dix painting or a God, who am I thinking of? Harmonious Bosch painting or Caravaggio or some lamentation of the Virgin mixed with a torch singer, Judy Garland from the 1950s, right? It's all synthesized, it's all happening all at once. And that comes through a lot of political reasoning. I think a lot of inspiration from Lily Tomlin. So that clip is from, the Lily Tomlin clip is from like 1971. This one is from 2 years ago. And trying to bring these forces together and create an affectual state where the body is speaking in multiple tongues at once. This is a state of being that I'm like really interested in, and I think Foucault addressed beautifully in his talking about what a face can do, right? A face can both articulate the individual, but it can also articulate the context in which that individual is striving to exceed or just fucking survive in, right? And so this is, you know, this is some of the things that Jib says about herself. A voice of unreason for uncertain times, falling apart, stand up. And that status of like bodies being kind of whatever, either torn apart by the limitations of identity or gender, which I'm just going to say identity encapsulates all that, and I'll let it go at that. As you try to strive and accomplish what you want to do with your work is by all means the constant struggle that as artists, but I think just as people, we're all grappling with. Okay, how do is this full screen? I guess it is. I don't know. Okay, so one more video performer that I absolutely love is Kate Giordano. So this is just a really short clip of Kate Giordano. This one is, it's got some good guys and some bad guys. This is actually shot in a beautiful place in Greenpoint called Luncheonette. It's a collective where a bunch of artists share this old diner and they do screenings and video projections and things like that. And Kate used this to do this Rex film for a couple months. She used the restaurant as a location. And this is just a tiny little clip of Kate posing questions vis-a-vis the kind of representation, again, the kind of play with representation, which is by no means a stable representation. And what I mean by that is there is the identity of every one of these characters of which she is portraying, now they is portraying, is slippery, it's unstable, it's glitchy, it doesn't abide by a kind of enclosure of an engendered thing, right? And so the destabilized representation is the thing that is also really confounding and like totally inspiring for me in this work. So again, I'm starting out with my influences.
How you doing? Any more coffee for you? Good morning, young man.
Good morning, dear darling.
What can I get for you this morning?
Coffee black,
All right.
orange juice.
Okay.
I would like some home fries,
Home fries.
one slice of bacon. Well done.
These potatoes are really good today, Carl.
Get back on the floor, Dolly.
You want some more coffee?
Oh yeah, please.
How the kids doing?
Kids are good. Lunch it at.
Hey, it's Anton. You put Dolly on the line? Hello?
I've been trying to get a hold of you all morning.
Anton, it's busy. I'm at work.
Hey, what'd you do with the chicken cutlet from last night?
I don't know. Did you check the crisper?
The crisper?
I don't know. It's in there.
Alright, yeah, it's here. Listen, don't go putting chicken in the crisper anymore, alright? It's weird.
Bye. Here's your coffee.
So I really highly recommend tracking down like any of their screenings. Anytime you can get your hands on one of those shows. In fact, they just finished a production of a film that they researched forever on Waco, Texas, and it's called like The Last Wife, about the whole controversy of what's his name, who created this religious cult and ended up like orchestrating this mass suicide. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. It happened in the 90s. Was it the 90s, Nelson? I can't remember. An absolute tragedy. All this religious orthodoxy gone completely psychotic and tied into like really gnarly toxic masculinity, which is clearly something that Kate's wanting to observe. Okay, so I'll go to the images of these paintings. Okay, so how does that translate into a painterly practice? I'm not actually really sure, right? I'm not actually sure like how thinking about imagery via film, right, via cinematic presentation or whatever practice or performative practices translate into painting, right? I know it doesn't do so directly. I know there's no literal equivalence, and I don't really care. All I know is that when I study films, which I do obsessively, like this film, which these two paintings, they're both 7 foot by 4 foot wide, are portraits of the actress Magdalena Montezuma, who performed as a muse in this legendary queer well, gay, filmmaker named Werner Schroeder, who was one of the German New Wave, sort of like the granddaddy / least known of them because his films are astoundingly strange. And they kind of counteract every modality of representation that happened in the 20th century. He continued on the radical theories of displaced sound to image almost throughout his film work. So this is a really early cinematic criticality, right? That's based in Brecht, but really what it's about, it was written unfortunately by some Russians who are now the villains of the world, but whatever. The criticality of the dislocation of sound and image was considered by all important radical film thinkers from Foucault back to Eisenstein, the first great montageist, and Vertov in Russia. But it hop skips all over the place and is included in a lot of even contemporary Afrofuturist films like Afronauts. Okay, and why people were obsessed with the dislocation of sound and image in film, and I want to talk about this in relationship to representation and painting, is because because everyone believed, rightfully, dare I say, that if sound and image coalesced into a psychotic making level of seduction, the populace was lost. Like literally, sound and image syncopated becomes the most seductive and pacifying condition technologically that's ever arrived in a human's lap or psyche, and basically would cause catastrophic loss of agency for the working class. And I think we actually can see that that's kind of playing out in a lot of ways, even though we have a better standard of living than when Eisenstein and Bazin wrote that in the 1910s. Those texts, of which I can, if you're really interested in this tedious shit, I'm gonna get to the fun stuff in a minute. I can share. So when you're looking at a 19th century realist painting of a figure, right, of which there are a lot of young figurative painters, and this is kind of why I want to talk about this, because there's a bunch of young, really virtuosic, really believable figurative painters today, of which I will name no names, and I refuse, so don't ask me. You get this kind of neo-academic, but 19th century academic, because we have to understand that abstraction was a 20th century academic by the time it landed in my lap in 1987 when I went to art school. The figure was meant to be illusory and believable so that it would produce the intended circumstance in the viewer, right? So think Disney, okay? Think about how manipulative and how perfectly Disney produces a condition of thinking and feeling that the producers of the film are totally in control of, right? They just run the show for you. Now, abstraction was meant to activate the viewer and cause the viewer to produce, you've had this conversation in your critiques, I'm sure, to produce a situation where you were struggling to understand through the chaos. So think back to Gibbs's performance a minute ago, like, what the hell is she doing? And you're forced to be highly actively building a relationship with this subject that is glitchy, slippery, moving around in ways that don't tell you how to think and feel. What the hell are you supposed to do with that, right? And so why am I saying this? So when I'm making these paintings, I am never trying to render a believable figure. I'm trying to show the interpretive space of how I'm understanding these actors and trying to embody their movements. But in a way, at a level that is just complete enough to where the viewer needs to battle with the abstraction of these images, right? There's a virtuosity where I can draw, I can paint anything, I can paint something that is absolutely and utterly believable, but there are pieces that are very intentionally left out for the reason of actually that cinematic problem that was posed to representation and to the seduction of media a million years ago, all right? So in there is where I tag myself as a modernist, right? I tag myself as not an author because I'm not writing the scripts often of these paintings. I'm gonna get into that in a minute. But these are images that I'm highly involved in trying to embody the affect, the gestures, the absurdity, the operatic madness of Magdalena Montezuma, this fabulous, big-boned, irreverent, crazy person that lived and worked and traveled with the director Bernard Schroeder for like 15 years before she died very young of cancer in 1984. So this is a homage to people who actually are committed to a very critical, very hilarious, not boring, actually. If you actually can figure out how to watch a Werner Schroeder film, you will not be bored of that, I promise you. At least this one, which is called Willow Springs, which is about a lesbian commune who kill off men as they come up to the gas station that doesn't sell gas. So this is her at the gas tank, and she's like, "Hi," right? Like, I'm going to seduce you, you know? And it's like, and by the way, I have a pussy and a gun. So this is one of them, and there's the pussy and the gun on the left. And the bunny. Okay, now, so, but here's where the imagination comes in and where it becomes actually sustainable for me. So one would say like, am I just sitting here mimicking, right? Because I'm interested in mimicry, but I'm interested in a hyperactive capacity to mimic something. And in this case, there's a huge leap from the cinematic image to the painterly field. But those shoes, you don't see her shoes in that movie. And you certainly don't see them in the frame that this is loosely based on. So these are loosely based on frames. But those shoes came out of the process of painting, the process of shifting and changing the images and trying to find a very particular punk rock gesture of 2 toes, 90 degrees opposed, right? That like one knee tilted in and one knee like this, right? And then like, as I'm building the feet, I'm finding those shoes and designing the shoes and thinking about the moment. So I'm thinking through the lens of the film. I'm also thinking of the lens through like design in 1974, high heels, pleather, and it's fun. But anyway, the image almost coalesces, it doesn't quite, right? It doesn't have the kind of perfect atmospheric synthesis of a Nisque image, for instance. So these are some prints that I made right before I embarked on this series of paintings that I did with actually Anitra, Brendan Nelson, and I's Marina Ancona at 10 Grand Press. So I'm showing you these to show you like some process and some ways in which I'm able to internalize my understanding of these characters that I develop relationships with, even if they're long dead. And profoundly obscure. I hope some of you will look up Werner Schroeder, but you know, good luck with that. So these are monotypes I made at 10 Grand Press. They're, I don't know, 24 inches. And they're from various frames from another film called Eka Katapa. The film again that I used for pardon me, that I used for the show that I'm going to talk about, which is called Life is Very Precious Even Right Now, that I just had in Los Angeles, was called Willow Springs again. All right, so I want to talk about process a little bit in the sense that this is an image that I'm actually not using any source material. but I'm actually erasing and going in and altering an old painting and following my nose and acknowledging what I see, no matter how inappropriate it is. Okay, not that this is inappropriate, nobody would care about a lady biz at this level anymore, right? Certainly not in this room, one would hope. But I did make this painting shortly before the Dobbs decision came down, right? So I'm like, and it's just like, this is it. And so this painting is called Afterbirth. And it is actually loosely based on a painting that was in my closet forever that was like a painting over a photograph of my mother. So I painted my own mother's pussy, so you guys can all like throw me out in the street now. And these are the kinds of things that you know, we should be able to do. And we're very disallowed with me again in this early modernist education. So, so even when we're alone, we're not alone. So that painting was just me transforming an old painting that I didn't like and being fed by all of these other stories that I'm going to get to, all these cinematic references, all these references to rock and roll, thinking about architecture, thinking about style, culture, beauty, womanness, and all the problematics of that. So this is another one. This formerly, I'm sorry, I don't have an image of that, was a painting of like a bunch of fantastic mid-century architecture, like strewn on the coast of LA, that I smeared a bunch of brown onto and turned into this. So I think there are some details of the small stuff that was the architecture that the image evolved into. These are some more altered paintings. The process of altering the paintings is very similar, again, to the way I made those shoes. And I guess I'm talking about it in a sense that, going back to the Montezuma series, I work in series. So in this case, this painting is actually called Life is Very Precious even right now. And it's a quote of this dying damsel in one of Schroeder's films that she plays with blood all over her face. And she's like, life is very precious, even right now. And she actually says it in English, even though it's mostly in German. So I was riffing on Western expansion landscapes and the script of that movie and sloshing paint around and finding these images without actual references at all. So I was engaged deeply in meditating on what these films were talking about and the narrative of what brought Schroeder there, which was actually one of his favorite actresses, Christina, I can't remember her last name. Her children had been taken away from her. She was married to Tony Curtis and they were going through a divorce. And Tony Curtis decided that he wanted to have the kids in custody because she was living this rogue, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Whatever, wild lifestyle. And so her and Schroeder and Magdalena went to America and hired a lawyer and got her kids back, and they went back to Germany after the production of Little Springs. So this is an absurdist landscape. I don't make landscapes. I'm really interested in like genre bashing, genre fudging, like the absurdity that like portraits are not portraits, landscapes are not landscapes. Like all of these things are constructs of ideologies, just like abstraction and figuration are. They're all ways of us not being able to find fluid, insane spaces where we can actually become who we need to become as people, right? And so I use these genre structures to operate in, but I could give two shits about them. Two, well, maybe not even one, okay? So this is kind of loosely what the architecture in Willow Springs looks like. And no, there is not a giant Bierstadion mountain behind it. So some details of the architecture. The film is strewn with telephone poles, and it really very intentionally dates the time period. This is my little Schroeder right there. More riffs on the landscape. This one is actually a cast Montezuma as a Circe kind of character, like come to my island and I will turn you into pigs and swine and dogs and weasels, you horrible Argonauts. Another kind of Jason and the Argonauts riff with some gay men, of course, because Schroeder was very gay. And some other things that are probably inappropriate to talk about. So this is a show, just to show the scale of the work and context and the installation of the show in Los Angeles in September. And this is the one painting that was a revision of an older painting that I included in the show, mostly because the Dobbs decision had happened at that point, and I was really fucking pissed off. And I wanted a very full frontal pussy in the show, just in case anybody was wondering. So think back to the irreverence and the absurdity of that feline depicted by dropping the coffee cup, right? The betrayal and the desire that Kate Giordano is able to like articulate and embody through these like really absurd kind of ridiculous stereotypes, but that actually really resonate in a way that makes a lot of sense. So these are some of the small paintings that were in the show. Okay, so since we're talking about vaginas and pussies, I had mentioned earlier that in my way of trying to maybe say what can't be said or show what can't be shown, what shouldn't be shown. I was working on a series of videos that are covers of existing songs, and you know, there's a huge tradition of this, of course, from mainstream like Nina Simone doing Bob Dylan to artists like Linda Montano having a long-term relationship with a mimetic relationship with a Bob Dylan character. I really love Bob Dylan. I know that seems absurd with like a little like big old lesbian up here talking about how much she loves Bob Dylan, but it's true. I love listening to the songs in the studio. And this song particularly struck me because of its associations to gentrification, which were very clear. You know, also just the pompous, I mean, I also find him loathsome, like the pompousness of like his kind of mansplaining persona that he's created, you know, that's like, he's the one that is gonna pollute your brain with what needs to be said. Anyway, so I made this video, and this is, I learned the song. So oftentimes like I think of learning music like drawing, and I'm using drawing all the time as like ways of finding new possibilities of what the work can say and do. Like that's like what drawing should be. And video I think of often as part of the expanded notion of my drawing practice. So this video is me having spent, I don't know, like a year learning how to play and sing simultaneously the song, and also me in my domestic setting. Okay, we can stop there. Sorry about that, people. Did everybody survive that? Is that enough full bush for you? There's so many more. I mean, not that I would ever like send people to my like Vimeo page or something, but that's actually a page. This is like really a way in which you can see what it means for me to train myself to make one of these paintings, actually. Like the amount of time I spent studying the gesture, obsessing over the context and politics of these, you know, obscure films from the 60s or contemporary films or whatever it is that I'm looking at, and trying to bring it into the practice. It's like that amount of repetitive interaction with the material, right? So in that way, I'm like kind of like a method painter. But Steve DiBenedetto called me that once, which I kind of like a kind of person that like gets so transfixed by what they're looking at that they internalize, right? And it melds with the interiority of me. And the me gets lost. Right? It's like, I'm still here. I'm still uber frontally present in that, but I'm also actually melding my body and my thoughts and everything that I have, every ability that I have with this material that is significant to me. And for that, I got kicked off of YouTube permanently. Well, part of the reason why I showed my bush was it was sort of a shout out to the great Kirli Schneemann. And I had done this like before I actually met her, but because, you know, all the avant-garde filmmakers that she was interacting with were like, how could you put like sex in Fuses? Like, how could you do this? Like, so Fuses, amazing. Kirli Schneemann film, watch it. It's on YouTube, it's on UbuWeb. It's an astounding abstract film that combines filmic loops of her and her partner having sex and just being in the apartment and having this like really enduring, exquisite, both emotional and physical intimacy. And it sets the bar for what life should be like, as far as I'm concerned. And I later met Kirli, and that was astounding, which is another story. But anyway, so I was thinking about Fuses when I decided where to put the camera. Like, it's like, okay, if I put the camera on the floor, it's really going to be too much. Oh, I guess I better do that, right? And it's the same thing of thinking about point of view in that painting of my mother. Right, the afterbirth painting, like where am I going to put the painting and how high up can I place the legs and how far can I place the viewer in proximity to this thing that literally, like, you can fetishize every beautiful little child on YouTube, but you can't show middle-aged Lady Bush without being kicked off permanently. You notice it says, don't try to ever rejoin again. So this is kind of like how I feel about it. So, but not really. So this, I'm going to go into another couple of series here. This is the great actors from the 70s. Again, part of me, I'm not just trying to be an obscure horror here, although probably I am in some way, but part of me that like is citing these older instances is partially just because it had to do with it's very formative in my childhood, but it's also because I think like the obsession with the new, right? The obsession with, oh, like Beyonce is like blah blah blah, it's like changing the world, or Sarah, what's her name, the comedian Silverman is like done the most repulsive thing ever. It's like, I guarantee you I can find something that somebody else did before that was way more insane. And the idea that like all of these amazing things that we have exist in proximity to like elders, right? To awesome elders, and to thinking that you, not just you, but me as well, haven't been told about because you've been enclosed in a kind of consumer spaceship capsule of very particular kinds of media and particular kinds of values. So when we talk about like a lot of things of like intimacy, rawness, vulnerability, that's a big conversation driving lots of young artists in their practice today. I hear these words thrown around not casually all the time. And I can't think of anybody that was able to embody and to permeate with beautiful agency and humor and grotesquerie like this actress Gena Rowlands, who acted with Cassavetes and co-authored films with him from the mid-60s until he died in 1984. She was I want to emphasize that she was the co-author of many of the most important films. They really did collaborate. It was not, oh, Cassavetes is this auteur, he's the one that like the director that brought out her greatness. Many people, including a brilliant friend who I've collaborated with a lot, who I'm going to talk about in a minute here, think that she was the real genius in the sense that she was so utterly unsentimental in her relationship of a particular kind of vulnerable female that the world was not ready to see yet. And that movie, by the way, is called A Woman Under the Influence, and also Opening Night. But this is a television still that was sent to me by an artist named Dawn Clements, who passed away in 2018. And I want to talk about the hole in the head as a portal here for how ideas end up in my lap in my studio. Okay, so Dawn and I were Dawn went to Brown, by the way, like absolute media dorks, like cinemaphile, like off the charts. And she would draw in her apartment and watch Grit TV, which is this television show of all Westerns all the time, channel based on all Westerns all the time in New York City. And if Jenna Rollins came on, and they were all from the 70s, she would just take pics on her phone and send them to me. So when she died, because I was obsessed. So when she died, I took those images and made a series of paintings on them. And so this idea that like Dawn was actually giving me a commission to make an image, and who better to make a commission for her, right? Not General Motors, because as we've already seen, Lily Tomlin doesn't think much of General Motors, and probably none of us do, right? They're like I mean, whatever, Obama bailed them out, but they're basically part of the power apparatus that is screwing us all over. But Dawn Clements, who is a non-materialistic champion of all things big and small, fabulous and meaningless, is somebody that actually really matters to me. So at a certain point, I decided that I was going to start doing commissions based on relationality, based on these relationships that actually were just stronger and more meaningful to me. But I also really wanted to kind of make fun of, just like Tomlin is making fun of the apparatus of the television, the telephone company, I'm making fun of that, the history, which is not even in the history, right? If you think about it, there's like still presidents commissioning horrible portraits of themselves for, you know, for mass consumption and to promote the kind of authority of that office. Now, some of them are good. I like the Kennedy, actually, in case anybody needs to record that on record. But anyway, the best presidential portrait ever was done by Elaine de Kooning of John F. Kennedy in 1962. She did it in 15 minutes, motherfuckers. Anyway, sorry, excuse me, I just said motherfuckers. So anyway, I got a little excited. So these are some of the stills that Dawn sent me. Oh, by the way, so this painting, which was in an exhibition in New York called The Long and Short Shots, it's all about like cinema, but is 7 by 11 feet. So it's bigger than that. So it's a big cinematic head. It was like 3 sections of about 4 hours each. Not that long. Yeah. I can make paintings really fast and really slow. Time is like, I like that question. Yeah, by all means, by the way, studenti, interrupt me in the way. I love that you did that. I should have invited that before. Time is like totally relative in painting. It can take like 8 years or it can take like 8 minutes. And there is no like value that makes it more important because it took 8 years. Yes. But there were small paintings, and this is one of the few paintings where I actually made a smaller version and then a larger version. So I did know I had internalized a lot of what was going on. I know it doesn't feel like an Alex Katz. It feels like you're being slapped by a drunk lady. That's a small one. All right, so this was one of the small ones, made from that still. And that's gone. Hi, Donnie. We love you. We miss you. So this is a painting that provoked Dawn to send me those images. I made a series of paintings called The School of Jenna Rollins, and it was all about championing this woman who was willing and able to make herself look hideous, absurd, crazy, to show the kind of vulnerability that women live through every day. And in America specifically, but I think there's certain elements of universality to it, if there is a such thing. So this is Summer Camp School of Jenna Rollins, where there's like this bond. I actually did this with my grad students from RISD. Like I invited us 5 years of recent alums from the RISD MFA to come up to our house upstate. And they camped and we screened movies and had bonfires and cooked and drank beer and did all this stuff together. And we screened, this is a still from Glory Head, which is astounding, amazing. Woman who takes revenge on the mob. No detail of that. That's a large one as well. Another one of the Grit TV ones. Of Jenna, and yeah, I made some paintings of really beautiful blondes, and that's what it is. What can I say? I needed to, I love her. Okay, so, but I don't think she's a beautiful blonde like, you know, some other ones that are, I think she's, an exemplary, radical thinker, and so, yeah. Still a beautiful blonde. But I think that in that case, like she used her beauty to transgress her beauty, right? She actually used just like Carol Lee, which I know some people think that's not the case, but I do. Anyway, so, but that's, so it does. So this is, the artist, filmmaker, fiction writer, essayist, biography writing, pervert named William E. Jones. He's an artist that's been based in Los Angeles since 1978. So this is not a photo of him. This is a painting I did of William over 4 days at Skowhegan in the summer of 2017. William is a bossy, hilarious, insanely brilliant, and loving friend that got under my skin, and we communicate every day since that time. And when I was asked to do a show, the first show at NMB in Los Angeles, I asked them if I could do a show about my correspondence with him. So very similar to the relationship with Don, where he commissioned me to make a series of paintings. So the most abject fisting top daddy was the person who I chose to be my power apparatus. Why would I do that? Well, I think it's pretty obvious at this point, I would hope. We're trying to articulate my what is important to me. What matters? So William gave me a list of titles. This one, and I didn't know what they were. I said, send me 15 titles. And if I have questions, I'll ask. Of course, I talk to you every day, so we'll have a conversation about them anyway. So the title that provoked this image is called Sea Creature, Sex Creature, and it's a song lyric from this guy named Bill Evans. It's this like legendary gay disco song, although Bill is not gay. It's a new wave punk song. It's kind of like really disco-y, so it's a polluted like mess. Like all the old punks, you know, were like, oh God, we've lost the purity of the form. And of course, all the perverts were like, yay, purity is dead. So it goes, it's like sea creature, sex creature, woman in love. Like that, right? And everybody at the discos in the early 80s were dancing to it and whatever, button genitals. So I knew the song, but I didn't know the lyrics. I'm like, what the fuck is that from? And he's like, okay, sea creature, sex creature, blah, blah, blah. And I made about, I don't know, 4 paintings based on that. This one is particularly fabulous. And all I did was I attacked the surface of the painting. I didn't have a drawing or an image or anything planned. So here's what I want to say again, the medium for text. I want to go back to that point that I brought up earlier, right? Like I was fed this script and I performed the script like the way that when Jenna Rollins asked for a script from John Cassavetes about a middle-aged woman having a nervous breakdown, which is what A Woman Under the Influence is about. Can you imagine like going and seeing a movie about that? I'm sure everyone's like, who cares about that? Like, let's watch like people kill demons. Anyway, so although there was some demons in this penny, so I reject that statement. So this is Sea Creature, Sex Creature number 2. I don't think I have them all in there, but it was a very productive prompt. And I listened to the song a lot of the time when I was working on the paintings. It was just so fun because it was like like I took it literally. So I got to get rid of gravity. I was underwater. There was orgy. It was just a good time. Now this one is Jenna Rollins in the film Neon Bible. Neon Bible is a really amazing novel about the American South and racism, and this spinster that Rollins plays, who used to be a jazz singer but ended up a prostitute, and then came home because she was getting too old to work the streets, as it were. And this is the moment back at home that she actually kind of becomes a singer again and becomes like an emblem of the community, even though she doesn't embody the heteronormative codes of what should and shouldn't be in that neighborhood. So yeah, John Toole, Neon Bible, he also wrote Confederacy of Dunces, and it was made into a film with Jenna Rollins. This one here, which we're going to go to in the next image, was, oh no, it's this one. William asked me to do a painting about Medea, so the myth of the woman that betrayed Medea, killing off the 2 children that she had with Jason and the Argonauts. And depending on who tells the story, you know, are they, is it because she is sexually betrayed by him, or is it because they're going to be forced to slavery because of his disavowalment of his own family obligations? I'm with Toni Morrison on that one. P.S. This one is called Relishing After the Threesome. So there's this, William has written 3 not autobiographical, even though they come off as kind of like performing the genre of autobiographic novels or memoirs, stories about being in Los Angeles in the late 70s through the mid 90s, and the transformations that happened in the art community and in neighborhoods there, from gentrification to the kind of hipsterization of like what it means to be an artist going from a kind of working class persona or person to a kind of fabulous lifestyle character that is more indicative of what we're doing now. And I'm not saying that entirely as an insult, but it is what it is, right? At this point, and this is what this book is all about, is to remind people that no one expected to have great success and have their work strewn all over all the magazines and the walls of all the museums 2 years after they got out of grad school, or 1, until about 10 years ago. And that might not always be the way it's going to be. I guess we'll see. Will it always keep growing? I guess rich people will always keep throwing their monies into these institutions. Who knows? Anyway, so in the midst of like being absolutely insanely bored with the clanniness of this Cal Arts in 1984, William falls in love with these 2 guys, and they develop this, or not William, but William's character, his narrative, develops this 3-way relationship. So he asked me to base this on a photograph, which I will talk about. It's too tedious. I don't even know what to begin to say about this. What's that?
Reginald Marsh.
Reginald Marsh is in it, in these across the board, but it's not Reginald Marsh. No, it's the Baron von Gluten. It's
I'm
the
just asking if you feel that's much of it of like a reference point for you.
absolutely his like Marsh's is, I mean, to go back to that, you know, I mean, it's not like he wasn't celebrated during his lifetime, but not like de Kooning or Picasso or something like that. But, or Hopper for that matter, because he was kind of a sloppy social realist. I mean, he was really mostly thinking about class, and he was actually wanting to tell stories, which was not allowed, right? And we were supposed to like accomplish this one-to-one purity of, I am nature or something. And sort of like, it's like, be the author, but take the author out of it, all these absurd things. And Marsh never lost sight of like his particularities of who he is. Absolutely. And the drawing and the painting together stylistically, very important for me. And William actually gave me a prompt for a movie, a ticket line painting based on Marsh, which I don't know if I still have it in this, but that was before we did this show, which by the way, is called Angela Dufresne as William E. Jones's painting bottom. So this one is called Stalin's Vagina. At some point, I don't even know where to begin with this. People can ask afterwards if they're curious to know some of the background of this, but it seems to have a particularly fucked up and I think pertinent tone now, given that we have somebody that wants to think he's Stalin. But yeah, William was going to write a science fiction novel called about Stalin, and Stalin was going to be maybe compromised in his masculinity, and he decided that that was a really bad idea, which I approve. But I do love the idea of Stalin being forced into being a Delphi Sibyl and absorbing the hot spring, the geothermal gas of the land that he pillaged to fund some of the escapades of the early Bolsheviks in Azerbaijan, which is where this painting is set. So would I have ever made this painting? Hell the fuck no. I would never have painted about this or this image, which is clearly an image that was distributed to coerce sex or prostitution on the internet. That was a rule that I said after I had seen one too many stupid pornography paintings in the 1990s that I would never do. But when William asked me to do a painting of this guy, I was like, well, this will be really interesting for me to try to get into your head and into your desire sets and see if I can make an interesting painting about it. It's based on another painting I did earlier that I did at General Owens. And anyway, this was an incredibly transformative process. So this guy's literally saying like, I can take it, daddy. So to have me, this person who has never been in a positionality proximity to that body, to transmit and to try to empathize and have compassion and care about these desires was fucking amazing, transformative process to go through, role to play. So oftentimes the text turned me into a role player. So I want to talk a little bit about a more contemporary not contemporary, like this just left the studio a week ago, and I made it for Monsieur Zohar, who is this amazing artist that teaches at SBA that works across everything from performance to sculpture to painting, and he's doing a show called My Condolences, and he's asked 100 people to portray him. And when we went back and forth about what that kind of depiction would be, I just reenacted the process that William and I went through, the call and response, the commission process. And by the way, when I sold paintings from that show, I actually paid William 10% commission. So there's actually an economic thing. It's not just like a performative talking point. He actually made a chunk of change collaborating with me on that exhibition. So this is, Monsieur gave me this prompt: baby dominatrix in purgatory pig party dreams of having it all. And I went into this painting not knowing what I was gonna paint, and I just started moving paint around and landed here. It actually is painted over an older painting, and so there's some color that I think affected how the image evolved. This is another person I collaborated with on narrative paintings. This is Myrna Greenhalgh. I work in a studio in her barn upstate New York in the Catskills. She gives it to me for free, and I do things like clean things for her. And like, I don't have to mow her lawn or something, but sometimes I like cut down a tree or some shit. And she's amazing. Like Myrna is just, she's like 82 years old. She's super foxy. Her politics are amazing. She's insanely generous. Her husband died like 2015, and it was abysmally tragic. And then, you know, a year went by, and now she's like, I miss him, and I'm like living this amazing life. I've got all these weirdos around me, like Angie's up there painting in my shed. I've got some band in there too, and blah, blah, blah. She's like living a bohemian life. Like at 82, she kicked that into gear. So I love her. So so with William, when that process of bossing me around and throwing out ideas and things for me to paint, which is also, by the way, very antithetical of the kind of like heretic studio practice of like, oh, I'm a modernist and I'm gonna go into a hole and I'm gonna find my voice alone as an individual against the world. For me, I'm not saying that doesn't work for some people, by the way. For me, it's total bullshit. And so I really wanted this call and response and this relationality to enter back into painting, because like 500 years ago, somebody was sitting down with Caravaggio going, so what do you think about that story of Narcissus? Like, what about the, you know, I'm drawing a blank on that, the 7 Acts, which is in Naples, right? And they start talking about it, and they start building an idea, and then he makes drawings, and then he, you know, although evidently Caravaggio didn't make drawings, or he doesn't talk to them, and he takes a bunch of people and he brings them in his studio and paints them, but he has to alter his self to think about this subject that he needs to do justice to. This is the thing that I discovered as a mature artist, that actually I didn't need to author anything. I needed to have the studio communal. And so Myrna comes over all the time, blah, blah, blah. So when the portrait's being painted, she's talking and saying, I'm saying, okay, I want to come out of this portrait session or sessions with a prompt. And she came up with, this was during COVID too, by the way. She's like, I just want to get the fuck out of here. This is like the, you know, climate change, politics are hell. There's no community out of the education system, shit, all of these things. She's very upset, having basically your standard liberal values and seeing all of those things kind of dissipating and sort of failing. She's like, I think I want to be in space with the Jewish, she's very Jewish, astronaut Jessica Meir. She was like obsessed with the fact that Jessica Meir spent Hanukkah up in the space station. Okay, I could give a shit about space exploration, like except for Bill Greaves, like Women of the Space Program, which is the most amazing documentary from 1982 about women in the space program. It's Ricardo Montalban does the voiceover. So could think it's a waste of money. But when Myrna said that, I thought, wow, what a crazy thing to make a painting about. And I, you know, I did love drawing all of those like Star Wars things when I was a kid. Yeah, I went and saw it and got a, you know, in 1976 in the movie theater and got the like sword afterwards. But anyway, and so I started drawing up plans for the space shuttle, based loosely on some of these images that, of course, I grabbed of Jessica Meir. And so this is the painting that resulted. Now, Myrna very much wanted to have media components to it, because she didn't want to necessarily be in space without any contact with what the hell is going on Earth. So it's very much like there's like nuts and bolts decisions throughout this thing. This is Myrna. As to how the painting turned out. this is, that's when Giuliani, oh no, that's Biden. It's like, oh my God, no, that's Bob, that's Myrna's husband. Sorry, that's Myrna's husband. But he looks very much like Biden. Sorry, I have to put my glasses on to see this. This is this Russian astronaut lady who, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name right now. And this is the Emirati guy who I can't remember his name either. This is Jessica Meir, and that's Myrna. And this is somebody I made up, and this is somebody that's a 70s American astronaut lady. This little frame here, which I can't zoom in, is like that moment that was all over Instagram where Cardi B is like, what? Like when Giuliani's like hair dye is dripping down his forehead. Anyway, so this is the kind of like amazing fun and like reality can come into the work when you're not alone, which we're not alone, right? And, you know, nobody at the Museum of Modern Art, I mean, maybe someday, but I'm gonna zoom through these a little bit. Those are more prints. Nobody in the Museum of Modern Art cares what Myrna Greenhall is doing, and I don't really care because she matters to me. And William E. Jones, they care about because they collect his work and they screen his films and stuff. But you know, he's not necessarily their go-to person. Okay, so I'm gonna talk like for like 2 more minutes because I know it's getting late. I feel like it's getting late. We got 4:37. Yeah. Way late. Sorry about that. I'm just gonna go like literally just say, you know, part of how I'm able to make these spaces and part of how I'm thinking through the work is eons ago, this kind of structural condition that I was thinking about fucking with, basically, just like Lily Tomlin calling up General Motors, was just actually the history of architecture and particularly modernist architecture, but it didn't stay that way. As folly, as this neoliberal construct, as it's evolved into of gentrification and of a particular kind of productivity to bodies, right? Like this architecture says you should be doing this, and that's what you should be doing. You're shopping, you're working, you're nailing, you're sewing, you're reading, whatever it is, and the architecture becomes the most explicit and potent like articulation of corporate power. Now, 50 years ago, I think I would have said state power. But I think as we've gone through this last 50 years of privatization and neoliberalism, it is in fact corporate power. And I was like, I just want to make a bunch of paintings where people are in these spaces and they're not working, they're not fucking, they're not sleeping, they're not shopping, they're just there being with each other and making these architectural situations, like taking away the wind out of their sails of power. Not that a painting can really do that, but that gets me through. All right, so this was an earlier one where there were no figures. And this is a painting of like a redevelopment of Brasilia, which I put in because of particular relevance today because of what happened last weekend. So somebody put a barn on top of it, and this is a complex, an education complex I designed for the singer Katum. It's the Katum Research Center in Brasilia. Now, clearly that makes no sense. This is what back when the Gray album came out. So this is the Modest Mouse Super Server in the Italian Dolomiti Mountains. So this is a shopping mall. I'm lost in a supermarket. And so that's the architecture of glass and transparency and fetishization that like is really fun to make paintings about. Some paintings I'm rendering, some paintings I'm drawing. The drawing is very much about the dissolve and the interdependence of figures, not the kind of form or autonomy. Rather, everything is interwoven and interlaced. I'm gonna fly through these, okay? This one's called, oh God, golden showers. I don't know if you can tell, but right, the kids are pissing on the adults and the adults are collecting the piss. And the guy with the beard right here is William. This guy disturbingly reminds me of Richard Nixon, but that's just an aside. And there's the street sign says Samuel Delaney Boulevard, so it's a shout out to the great Samuel's like Afrofuturist and essayist and genius Samuel Delaney. And this is another one, right? So this is kind of like, it was like a stairwell that's loosely based on this space, which is in Italy. It's a brutalist building that was a hyper productive space for the production of Max Mara fashion. And now it's an art museum, of which is not a coincidence. It makes, of course, perfect sense. It is, I guess, not a bad thing. Anyway, but it's somehow in the process of drawing it, and the railings, I couldn't make the railings that interesting as metal, and it sort of became this like, I don't know, Victorian New Orleans staircase. But still, the double staircase is a classic motif of efficiency and labor, and ain't nobody making any labor up in here. And that guy is clearly not Jesus. This is not Jesus. And there's the drawing, just to show you a little process. And I don't make tons of drawings for these, but I made one for that. And I actually used it to get the image on that painting. Both of these last paintings I just showed you, which I will stop here, are 9 by 12 feet. So they're also architectural scale. And so that getting into the muck and the mess of architecture is super, I think sometimes people think these works are disconnected, but to me, they're very, very interconnected in terms of like the operation I'm trying to do, the mess I'm trying to make in terms of like the expectations of you know, the genres I'm fucking with and painting. All right, yeah, so I'll stop there. So I'm gonna say more. Yes.
Yes, thank you for coming to talk. It was awesome, entertaining presentation. You used this word a couple of times
Mm-hmm.
during the presentation, which like somehow like 5 minutes, like never heard it used, but like already studying this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I understand what it means, like a way of explaining like representational work, but what do you think is achieved? How do you achieve your nemesis? Like the actual, like it strikes you as not just being representational. More often than not, it's like interpretive.
Yeah.
Literal sense of begins. What is it accomplished with that in your work? How do you feel like you have subverted it? Do you feel like I just kind of want to.
Yeah, I get it.
Maybe it's a definition.
I mean, I can't do definitions, but it's mostly because but it's a really important question, and I really did try to frame the conversation like around that notion, which was literally like, it's like the Antichrist in many ways to what should be possible in painting, right? Given the pre-modern legacy and the modern legacy of like how painting was used, and how it's fetishized by institutions, right? It's like I don't even know where to begin. Like yeah, I don't even know where to begin. Let me just slow down a little bit, right? There is no mimesis in painting for a long time until Warhol does the Campbell soup can, right? And that's the place where, and I'm sure there were other examples of that, but it's just the one that's easiest for me, given my training to cite. It's the first time that like something is copied and a reactionary program isn't reiterated, right? It isn't copied so that Campbell Soup's cans can get sold, or so that like power as we know it can remain the same, right? It's copied because what he's saying is that the project of industrialization, of modernization, ended us up with that, right? This is our reality, right? It's not like think Courbet's like hunters, you know, or something like that, or think of Thomas Hart Benton's murals of like, you know, workers, which I also love, even though he was a total prick. But it was this way in which mimesis was used to copy something, was used to alter its context and its meaning. So then you go into the 80s and 90s, which is where I was gleaned from as like a post-structuralist, right? Like I was like literally spawned from like the bowels of Roland Barthes, right? Like I was like death of an author, right? Like there is no author. Like we, whether it's writing or images, like I'm practically reiterating like Barthes' concept of like, we are not autonomous thinking, feeling beings. We are like these weavers of the fabric of what already exists out there in the world, right? And so you can't, and the most important thing, so in Death of an Author, right, it's like the most important thing that happens when a writer engages in producing a text is that the reader gets it. And then the reader creates a third world between between the author and the text, and they shouldn't necessarily. This is where it gets into like these false sense of neutralities that you're as completely psychotically thrust into the world, and it's wrong. But where the text is this thing that is autonomous from the context and the life of the author, right? It's like it's a bunch of stuff put together that eventually somebody gets and has to do something with. Like they have to read it and they have to produce images and sounds and smells and images in their head about what that text is doing. And that is autonomous from the context of the writer. And to a certain extent, it is the most important thing about why a text exists, right? And so when you say I'm mimicking, so when I say I'm mimicking like the Jenna Rollins' facial expression, I'm receiving that thing and reprojecting it, just the way Warhol might mimic a Campbell Soup can. But I don't believe in the post-structuralist critique of the individual, right? I can't purely mimic something and get out of the way, right? I am going to always be the agent that pollutes this aesthetic that's supposed to be able to be transformed into pure fodder. Like, I don't believe that Proust or Malamar or the people that Barthes writes about in that thing, or for that matter, I don't know. You think about a text now that's like way more interesting is like Cynthia Hartman's Wayward Lives. She is constantly citing that she is present, that she is the subjectivity that all of this stuff is being transformed through, right? But it doesn't mean that she's afraid to trespass in those images, look at them and make up stories for them. And to a certain extent, even sometimes mimicking the narratives that she knows about those things. But it's also a very problematic term, right? It's like mimicry is written about amazingly by thinkers like Nick Taussig as colonizers were living in Panama, and the indigenous folks are making fun of the colonizers by mimicking them. That later becomes this horrible film. I mean, it's not later, actually, the film exists before it, he cites it, sorry. But has horrible iterations, like the way that what's it called, Mad, what's that film called by Sean Rauch? The Mad something. It's an absolute like colonialist nightmare film about similar mimetic culture in Senegal. Where the he's decided to record these rituals of folks mimicking the European colonists and contextualizing it that they're making fun of them, which is a way more complicated picture than that, right? But my idea of mimesis comes from Jose Esteban Muñoz's idea of disidentification. So it's a queer, it's a queer theoretical platform of like, you take on sort of against Hortense Miller's, you kind of take on the master's tools actually to take down the master. So it's contradictory to that, even though it doesn't really work. In my sense, my pivot for that is I'm not going to take on the master's tool. I'm just going to take on the tools that to me hold the most value in cultural production. So friends and people that I really care about. What's that?
It was the Mad Masters.
Mad Masters, yeah, horrible. Don't watch it. I mean, I'm not recommending it by any means, but it's interesting. A better version of that is Tri Lee Min-ha's film, Reassemblage. It's the inverse of that. It's an absolutely beautiful film where she interrogates the privilege of Rapsu's point of view. But or Rokes, or however you say his name. He's such a prick, who cares? But this idea that you could actually like copy something and redeploy it through your body, it literally was like either forbidden or had to be done as tidy, neat conceptual art under the premise that you were no longer an author. And I'm like interested in something more messy than that, but that does involve mimesis. Does that help? You're like, not really, lady.
Yeah, it's whether that means you consider your paintings like a simulacrum,
No,
because you are trying to cover the original song you drink about.
but like, yeah, but like in Wayward Lives, like it's very, well, I mean, I guess you could say it depends on which notion of simulacrum you're talking about. Like if it's a simulacrum that like gets messy every time it repeats, like, so think about Fassbinder's film, World on a Wire, right? This guy's like living in what he thinks is the top tier of a non-simulacrum, that he's produced the simulacrum below him, there's nothing below or above him in terms of realms of reality, right? And then he later learns that he is in fact a simulacrum. It's an absolutely astounding film, two-part film that Fassbinder made for German television in 76, 77. But you know, that in that case, it's like if you're using simulacrum not as like a, yeah, as a polluted and to a certain extent messy proposition, then yes. There's a different question. This is a great question, but we could go on all night. I'm gonna ask this person whose face I can't see at all.
So I was trying to understand this in the beginning. You're talking about how like a lot of the war efforts were like based on artists' propaganda. You talk about like making film or paintings off of film stills. Like what is it exactly you're critiquing? Is it like the notion of the film's entirety, or like the actor's ability? Like what's more important?
I'm not actually critiquing the films, and I'm certainly critiquing the notion of like what could end up in a painting. But I don't paint film stills like in a way that like I think some of the I don't know, some of the picture generations or some of the new imagists, maybe even some of the Chicago artists like Destroy All Monsters and stuff like that are actually like producing images out of the hegemonic image production, right? The actual like big corporate machine of like, you know, notions of beauty, of masculinity, femininity, power, blah, 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 and trying to make fun of it. I'm actually finding better alternatives and painting about those. So I'm not actually doing a critical operation in that sense, but I think I am making to a certain extent, I am critiquing the pomp and the circumstance of those kinds of critiques. Yeah, yeah, because I mean, that work, you know, it almost killed us all with just like, so I really think that the notion of like criticality as an operation, like a notion of like the transgressive avant-garde did not accomplish what it wanted to do. And we need to think of other ways to get that shit done. Yeah. What do you got? Yeah.
Well, the first thank you for
Amazing.
making work from their position. One of them is Nicole Eisenman.
Oh, no, I mean, in Nicole, I'm just not, I mean, positionality wise, like, I'm taking cues from Nicole all the time, but I'm thinking more about people like James. Yeah. But anyway, go on, sorry.
No,
I mean, yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, like, I mean, Eisenman's really is a genius, you know, I mean, it's like, they,
really,
yeah, yeah,
and I still feel like general has to be good work.
yeah, yeah, I would agree. I mean, I love their work, I love them, I love the scope, I mean, I love the scope, the expansion into sculpture, but the strongest work to me, still to this day, is the printmaking. I think it's the most inventive, like, immediate, and direct mode of communication of like any printmaker on the face of the earth, but also just like any artist. And I think the humor and the irreverence like really gets clearly said in that work. So yeah, I mean, I was like in a show with Nicole in like 1995, like in San Francisco, like eons ago, like nobody knew who I was. I was like the weird non-person, and well, for a long time it was that way, but I've been like obsessed with her ever since, but to a certain extent, like I know Nicole, not that well, but we've definitely spent time together. The thing that gets Nicole going, so this is why I said that, I'll be just transparent with you, is thinking about culture at large, right? Like not just about like what paintings could do, but like what are people doing out there in the world to make this like a more fabulous place to be, you know? And like Nicole's, you know, I go to like a performance by Jack Ferber and Nicole's there. Now, of course she's there, right? Like, you know, there's, you know, one of the first times I ever saw Juliana Huxtable perform was in the garage, like after party for one of Nicole's openings. And it's just like, it's partially to be just always the coolest kid in the room, but it's because they are, right? It's like they're just ravenously, endlessly curious about everything. So the cue I'm taking from them is not like, what do I want my paintings to look like? Or like, how do I source my paintings? But like, how do I live my life? And knowing them as much as I do, like, it's like, oh, like they did a blog back in the mid 2000s with a bunch of, pardon me, this is really a joke, so please trigger warnings, but they used to called each other gay charts. And it was like all these like queer punks that were like, making fun of everything. And they were just like going down, like every day the blog would just be full of hilarity. It was like hilarity. It was like Lori Weeks, Eileen Miles made appearances. My partner Elizabeth Bonaventura was on there as like greasy hair. Rosanna Bruno, who's like an abstract painter, but also makes books about Emily Dickinson's Facebook thing. I don't even know where to begin, right? It was just a bunch of nuts commenting and riffing on culture. Wendy White, Paula Cronin, and it was before social media proper, right? It was like blog on like, it was like a net something blog, right? And they just created the thing and they just went there and they commented. It was before Facebook, it was took off, and before all this other social media. And it was like, it was literally an anarchist space of hilarity and genius. And like that blog really transformed Eisenman's work. The speed, the rapidity, and the richness. David Humphrey was on there too. Transform, I mean, whatever, I guess. I mean, Eisenman has always been open and porous, like should just like, yeah, comes in and they can just like immediately respond. So that interests me, but not, you know, not the aesthetics of the painting per se, but actually the life practice is most important. So I'm glad that you could help me figure that out. Thanks, man. Yes.
Thanks for your wonderful presentation. And I thought
Cute.
you invented your own language, your own aesthetic, and also I can sense the many influence from the history of painting. How would you differentiate your painting? Who influenced you? That's my question.
How do I differentiate the painting from the people who influenced me in the painting? Yeah, in the history. I mean, that's a really good question. Thank you. And again, I think I may be not talking about it clearly enough, but I think there is something about this notion of like the mimetic or the copy or the showing that I'm thinking about a painter like there's, I think maybe later in here, yes, this is a oh God, I can't, what was that? Somebody named this painting art history class. It's Veronese. It's Veronese, it's in Venice, it's the Feast of Levi, the Feast in the House of Levi. And I love this painting because there's all of this extracurricular stuff happening that doesn't really, in fact, this painting was he was arrested as a heretic for making this painting, which is always a markation of heroism to me. Because it was supposed to be a Last Supper painting, and he wanted to paint all this other fabulous stuff about contemporary Venetian life in the early 18th century. It might be late 16th, I can't remember. Anyway, but it was early 18th. And they were just like, what does this have to do with the Last Supper? So he changed the title of the painting. He changed it from the Last Supper to the Feast in the House of Levi, because that was the story, is that it's this posh house with all these like people around. But there was still problems with like the drunk German soldiers over here and all this other stuff, right? And I love, so this maybe is indicative of like what I'm looking for when I'm looking at art history. I'm definitely looking at art history all the time, and I know that's very clear in the work. And I'm not necessarily like, I'm not going to, and then mostly I think it's just because I'm a Euro cis female, like Euro originating cis female, so it's like the shit I have to deal with. So I'm kind of just like trying to deal with it, but the illusionistic constructs of perspective, of architecture, all that stuff are things that I feel like I love looking at and I want to cite. And I want to do something with unexpected. So when I see something like Veronese doing this absurd painting that like almost got him jailed, he did get off, as a heretic, I'm like, that's that's living the life of an artist in the way that I can get, right? That's like a kind of quality of life that I can, that's cool. So like, I went and saw this when I went to I did go to the Biennale. And it was awesome. This painting is absolutely astounding. Like, don't not go to the Academy because it's like dusty brown old European paintings, because it's an amazing painting. And there is an act of resistance to expectations of power in many of these old paintings if you let them sit with you. And those are the kind of tools that one can take from them. There's also something that I really like to do. So this is one more layer of answer to that question. I very purposely like to misinterpret the history of painting. So there's like a painting in, and I know a lot of this painting in Italy, especially because I taught there for like a year through RISD, and I also studied there as a graduate student at Temple. And I love Italy, not because I'm like, oh, the food and the wine, although of course I love that, but because it's like being in the belly of the beast. It's like, this is how the repetition of images that produced Christianity and power happened, right? And I want to see what that looks like, right? I want to know how that looks IRL, right? I think it's a fascinating place to go and witness, just like, you know, many other cities in Europe. But I'm not interested in, you know, the positivist history of Europe, clearly. But anyway, so there's this painting in Orvieto, and it's called like The Resurrection of the Flesh. And it just looks like a bunch of gay guys looking at each other, standing around naked. It is the funniest fucking painting you've ever seen in your life. It's just like, you know, and they're all like, there's like demons and blah, blah, blah everywhere. And there's some skeletons that are also like looking up at because they're coming up out of the grave and they're going to regrow flesh. And it's like the idea that like, you know, yes, you can know the context of this, and I know pretty much about why that painting was made and how the idea that like it's not there for me or you at this point to understand and reify its power. It's there for you, like art is for artists, like to look at and figure out how to misinterpret and redeploy at will as needed. So that's how I think about the history of painting. Thanks for that question, man, and for being brave. Anybody else? It's like literally no women have asked me a question. It's breaking my heart.
You can't stop.
Am I that scary? Am I like scary mommy daddy dagger? Clearly not.
Thank you.
Wait. Somebody shy is waiting to say it. Yeah. Yeah,
Another man?
that's okay. That's okay.
It's okay.
Yep.
So, it's not going to be the fishing, mostly the translucent.
Yeah.
And then specific, I don't know beyond this translucent.
Yeah, oh, I guess I should do, not that I assume people are probably still there, but the translucency is super important to me, and I'm glad that you pointed that out. Let me see if I can find one. No, I'm not gonna find one. Yeah, maybe here. But I'll go back to the piss painting because it's the like here. Okay, I mean, I can again, like thinking back to the portrait of William, you can see that I can render form, right? It's not about what you can or can't do, right? There is this sense that I want the figures to be as porous as I think we all are when we're trying to be with each other. right? We're trying to figure out how to communicate across all this difference and language and gender, again, all this crap that everybody's telling us is so toxic. And I don't, maybe it's not even as toxic as it is, but I think it's pretty toxic. And so, like in a painting like this, where you see these, the process of this painting was that I did actually, so this is again, a 9 by 12 foot painting. I spent like a month drawing, pardon me, little vaginas. Just like with a, like a, I don't know if you guys know her, but, Sue Williams, like calligraphic line of like lady bits and boobs over and over and over again, all across the surface of the painting. I don't even think I could zoom in close enough for you to see it. Every once in a while, you can still see it, under the assumption that I would lose it, that it would get buried by the image I was gonna take to it. And then, but I wanted to embed that history into the painting. And then I did these washes like here, and the greens, and some of the blue stuff. And there's also a tessellation of a purple ground and a kind of really, really chalky white ground over the drawing, transparently, so you can still see it. Across the whole painting, like, yeah, like open field, abstract underpainting. And then I bring the drawing to the painting. And I just let that under, whatever's there, permeate through the figures. I'm not, there are every once in a while, if it needs it, like this guy, I will do local color in the figure. But ideally what I'm trying to do is let the ground throb through the bodies, as though the architecture and the social networks and the interactions and the striving for intimacy and connection is throbbing through the bodies, like literally like that. And so that's what I really very consciously with the drawy paintings, with the paintings that are very calligraphically drawn, I'm thinking about that. So I mean, it's interdependency, or it's just porousness. It's just vulnerability to how, like the spatial conditions that we live in and how they produce us and we produce them. Thank you for that question. That was awesome.